Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Michael. I'm going to be your host for this afternoon session. We're looking at contra entries and how to post those in Sage 50 accounts. Quick session, this one. So a maximum of about 30 minutes. Should be around about maybe a 10-15 minute demo. And then we open up the questions as well. So if there's any additional demos you need to see, I can maybe cater for those as well. But we're looking at specifically at contra entries to begin with. Now, a little bit of housekeeping just before we get started with the session today, just primarily for those of you that have never attended a webinar before, maybe you've never attended one for a while, just remind you what's happening. You don't need a microphone for these sessions. If you've got one and you enable it, your microphone will just be muted, so you don't actually need one. You can't actually speak to us during the session today. So if you've got any questions, although you can't verbally ask them, you will be able to pop them into the questions panel. Now, it's just myself picking up those questions today, so I'll be doing the talking, the demos, and also picking up the questions along the way as well. So do bear with me here and there, but if you've got any questions, you just need to pop them in that little box in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. To access the questions panel on your toolbar, you just need to click that little icon, the one that looks like the speech bubble containing the question mark. It'll expand the panel. The box will be at the bottom. You can show or hide, and you'll have that available throughout the session this afternoon. If anyone wants a copy of today's slides, you can access that as well via the icon that looks like a little bit of paper with a folded corner. Just give that a click and it'll give you the option to download a copy of the slides. The detailed instructions on what we're covering today, you will find that available in the Help Center should you need the step-by-step guides though. Now, afterwards, you will receive a follow-up email. That follow-up email will include the usual links, a link to our recording of today's session, just so in case you need a bit of a recap or you want to share it with anyone. And also a couple of links, one to our registration page. So if you want to register for any other webinars, then it will include that link. And also, mind blank there. The other link will be to our list of recordings. So if you've missed any sessions, then you'll be able to catch up via that link as well. Julia, you're just asking there, is this for the latest version of Sage? So it's for Sage 50 accounts that we're looking at today. The option and what we're covering today, it doesn't matter really which version of Sage 50 accounts you've got. The options are exactly the same. So this one isn't for Sage Business Cloud Accounting. It's Sage 50 accounts that we're looking at today. I will be using the latest version, which is version 29. But as I say, the features or the options availability wise and the way that you would work through the various processing options will be identical. Right, okay, let's have a look at what we are covering. So a little bit of background to start with, what it actually is a contra entry. So I'll quickly cover that one. And then obviously we'll run through two demonstrations. Now I'm going to cover two. One is the manual method, which is a nice simple method. Even if you have access to the contra entries option, you might still use to do the manual method. Obviously, you'll see why. So one is the manual method. We'll run through that one, and then we'll run through the contra entries option as well. So a bit more automated, sort of guides you through the process step by step a little bit more. So we'll look at both. Once we've done that, obviously we'll make sure you fully understand what it's doing, etc. We'll pick up questions along the way as well. But once we've been through those demonstrations, we'll just explain more about the additional support, give you an idea of some of those webinars we've got coming up as well. And then, as I mentioned, I'll open up to questions at that point as well. But do keep them coming. If there's any relating to what I'm talking about at the time, I'll just try and branch off a little bit and pick those up. We should have plenty of time. Right, so let's start with a little bit of background to contras. So a contra entry would be posted where basically you trade with a business who you've got set up both as a customer and also as a supplier. And it's where you would have an outstanding balance against both of those accounts. So in this case, an outstanding sales invoice, an outstanding supplier's invoice. Now they may be for the same value, they may not be. But the process of offsetting those outstanding balances is known as what's known as making a contra entry. So you're offsetting one against the other. So as an example, let's say from a sales side, the customer account that you've got set up for that business is you've got £60 outstanding, and on the purchase side, the supplier account, you've got £100 outstanding. Now, when you do a contra entry, it would be for the lowest of the two outstanding values. So in this case, it would be for £60. So you would post a contra for £60, meaning that you've then got nothing outstanding on the customer account then. And what you'd be left with on the purchase account would be the remaining balance. So in that case, you would have £40 outstanding, and that would just be then processed as normal, whether it's purchase payment or some other method. Now, again, it might be that both the sales invoice and the purchase invoice were for the same value, in which case there'll be no difference. And it could be that the sales invoice is for a higher value than the purchase invoice. So again, you'd just be left with the difference. It's quite common, this as well, and I've come across it where I worked with previous companies where in sort of clothing, for instance, it could be where your company sources materials, you then sell those on to a subcontractor who then provides a manufacturing service to you. So you're selling the materials to them as a customer, as it were, and then you're paying them. So essentially, you would be invoiced via a purchase invoice for that manufacturing service. So essentially, what you would do is you would offset the balances. So just going to pay the difference essentially. Right, so what we'll do, just to make it a bit more meaningful, we'll just run through the two methods. Again, really simple methods that I'm going to show you. There are a few other methods that I've come across over the years as well, but I'm going to stick with the two basic ones, which is doing it manually. And then what I'll do is I'll also show you the automatic option as well. Now, the manual method, and I'll just give you a little bit of background to this just before I run through it as a live demo. A very simple method, applicable to all levels of Sage 50 accounts. Now, when I say levels of Sage 50 accounts, it means that it doesn't matter whether you're on the essentials level of the software, the standard level, or the professional level. You can use this method. It's also applicable to all VAT schemes, this method as well. And it's a very simple method, and it's basically you would determine the contra value and you would post a customer receipt against the customer for that contra amount, and then you would post a supplier payment against the supplier for that same amount, leaving you with an outstanding balance. So again, using the example that I just mentioned a few minutes ago, we've got a sales invoice for £60, purchase invoice for £100. So the lower of the two values could be £60. So we would post a customer receipt for 60, a purchase payment for 60. And then what we'll be left with against the supplier account is that £40. We just pay that off in the normal way. Now, when we do this and we post that customer receipt and supplier payment, and I'll try and pick up on this and sort of embellish on this a little bit as well as we run through it, is when you post that customer receipt and supplier payment for the contra amount, don't use your main bank account. That's the one thing or one bit of advice I would give you on that one. Now, when I did mention earlier as well that there are a few different manual methods, some people do question, well, could I just raise credit notes? Potentially, you can raise credit notes if you're on the standard VAT scheme. If you're on the cash accounting scheme, no, don't use the credit note method. Stick to this one. It's nice and simple, this method, and it's probably the fewest steps if you're doing it manually. So I would say stick to this method for manual contras, irrespective of which VAT scheme you're on. So let's quickly run through that and we'll just set the scene a little bit. What I'll do is I'll quickly share my desktop there so you can see my software. And I've got virtually nothing entered in this company, but I've got some customers set up, some suppliers. I've got some outstanding balances already on there as well. Again, trying to pick up on the technique that we just mentioned there, the example. So you can see I've got 3 customers here. So I've got A1D, A2B, A3, these customers, they're all set up. I've got them all set up as suppliers. At the moment, each of those 3 accounts has an outstanding balance of £60. And if we pop into suppliers, you can see I've got the same three accounts set up. Don't have to have the same account references, mine do, but they don't have to. You'll just be selecting what to offset against what. But you can see in this example, the outstanding balances against those suppliers are all £100. So let's say against this customer, this A1 design, we've got £60 outstanding, and we want to offset that against this supplier balance, so this one here. So the lesser of the two balances, or the lower, the £60, that's going to be the contra value. So all we do is, it doesn't matter whether you start with your supplier payment or your customer receipt, it's the same process. Now, Jill, you mentioned there, can you tell us why we shouldn't use our main bank account for contra entries? I'll explain that, and I'll try and include that in the demo. So just bear with me, and I'll come back to it, and I'll try and explain why. So anyway, we want to post a contra for £60. So actually, I'll do it from within the bank account screen. So you can see all of my accounts have a zero balance at the moment. And what I would do is I would go in, let's start with a customer receipt. Now I mentioned don't use your main bank account. And again, Jill, I'll come back to your question in a moment. Now, some people do set up a brand new bank account purely for contras. Others, if you've got one maybe on your list, so on this list here that you don't use, you might go in and rename it. So if I just rename this one here, let's say I don't use it, and I'm just going to call it contra. There's a couple of benefits to use or not using your main bank account as well, but I'll embellish on it in a moment. So we've got a bank account, a dummy account called contra, and that's the one I'm going to use to post the contra customer receipt and the supplier payment against at this stage. So let's start with a customer receipt. Choose my customer, this A1 design, and you can see I've got the invoice as the outstanding balance there. And what I want to do is I want to show a receipt in this case of the contra value, so £60 in this case. Now I'm just going to use today's date, and in the reference I'm going to put contra. You could put whatever you want in that reference if you want, but contra would make sense. The rest I'm going to leave blank. So the amount I'll leave blank. You'll see when I go in the receipt column and I complete this receipt that it will pop that value in there for me. So receipts, I'm just going to click pay in full in this case. Obviously, if I was part paying something, I would just type in the value. So I'm going to show a receipt of £60. So I'll save that. Now, as far as that customer account is concerned, you can see there's nothing outstanding at that point. So it's got it back to a zero balance. Next step is to post that supplier payment again for the contra value. So we're going to go back to bank accounts. And in bank accounts at the moment, you can see we're showing a balance of £60 against that contra account. So we've actually posted £60 coming in. What we want to do is post that supplier payment, again for the contra amount, again using that contra bank account. So it's got the relevant bank selected. We'll choose the relevant supplier. So that one. You can see we've got the one invoice outstanding. It could be multiple invoices, just a case of you choosing what you're paying off with this contra. Date's quite important. Make sure when you're posting the customer receipt and the supplier payment that you use the same date, and they will net each other off correctly in your accounts. So we got the date. We'll just again leave that as it is. I'll put contra in the reference. Again, I'll leave the extra reference blank and the amount blank as well. And all I want to do against this one, this time I'm going to part pay it, this time with what we've determined is the contra value. So we'll save that one. Now, if we go back to the bank accounts window, because we've used the same bank account for both the receipt and the payment, they should net each other off. So we know we've done that right in this case. It's back to a zero balance. And if we go into suppliers, you can also see the account it now has the reduced outstanding balance, and we would just pay that off in the normal way as and when. So when we pay the balance that's outstanding, or maybe that's the sales invoice was for the higher value, when we post the receipts, we would just post that in the normal way using the normal bank account. Now, the reason I mentioned don't use your main bank account, so just coming back to Jill's query, one is that if I had a balance on here and I've got loads of transactions going through it, one, first benefit, I can see this contra account. Well, it's back to zero, so I've finished that process. I've had the same money coming in as going out, so back to zero. The other one is when you come to reconcile your bank account. Now, if I'd posted those two transactions against my, say, my main bank current account, when I go into either, say, the reconciliation screen or maybe bank feeds, it means I'm going to have additional transactions in there. So although they offset each other off, they'd still be listed. They are transactions appearing on my bank activity that don't actually appear on my bank statement. So you just want to sort of avoid that little sort of spanner in the works type thing. So which is why we encourage you to use a different bank account. Now, yes, you could select those two transactions. You've got £60 coming in, £60 going out. They offset each other. The net effect is zero, but let's not have them there in the first place. So use, even if it was your petty cash, you're not going to reconcile your petty cash. You could use that, or as I say, use a dummy bank account instead. So that's the big benefit. It keeps it away from your reconciliation. We get enough queries to support queries for our teams relating to bank reconciliation without bringing that into the equation as well. So don't confuse the matter. Just use that dummy bank account or a one that you don't reconcile. Now, the second option I wanted to mention was if you in another scenario, let's go into this customer account. And this one here, this A to B manufacturing, if I go and have a look at the activity on this one, you can actually see in this instance, I've got two transactions in this instance. So I've got an SI for £100 and I've got an SC for 40. So both transactions outstanding, the overall balance will be £60. So best thing to do is when you go to post that customer receipt is allocate the transactions separately. Now, some of you will be very, you'll be very fluent in the use of Sage, in which case you might just do all that at the same time. Others, maybe not as sort of confident, probably encourage you to allocate it separate. So allocate this credit note to the invoice so that the invoice shows as £60 outstanding. So we'll just quickly do that one. Again, there's £60 overall outstanding on that customer, and on the equivalent supplier, we've got that balance of 100. So I'm going to split the customer process into two parts. We'll go into bank accounts, and for the allocation, for the allocation, it doesn't matter which bank account I use because I'm not receiving any money. I just want to allocate that credit note to the invoice. That's quite a common query as well. So I'll choose the customer receipt option, bring up that customer account, and I just want to allocate that £40 credit note to pay off part of that invoice first of all. So picks up today's date, I'll just leave it as that. Reference, I don't need to enter one. All I'm doing is I'm just allocating the transactions together. And I don't need to put anything in the amount either. Now, if you're like me, and I've always done it this way, I always start with the credit transaction, whether that's a payment on account or a credit note. So we'll start against that transaction. How much of that are you wanting to allocate? So I want to allocate the full amount, so £40, and I want to allocate essentially all of that 40 against the invoice. Now, when I tab out of that receipt column, so I've completed that receipt column, you should see the amount at the top is 0 and also the analysis total is 0. And all I'm doing at that point, I'm just going to click save. Now, when I call that account back up, you can see all that's left outstanding now, the credit note's disappeared, and obviously we've got that reduced amount on that invoice at that point. And then we're in the position where we can just continue just as normal and we're ready to post that contra. So just to remind you, if you're doing it manually, I'll select that contra bank account. I'll start with the customer receipt, choose the customer, I'll put contra in the reference. I'm just going to leave the amount blank. What I'll do is in the receipt column, I'm just going to essentially pay that one in full. I could click the button at the top in this instance, but it's £60. And then what we'll do is I'll just save it. You can see we're back to having a balance against that contra account at that point. And what I now need to do is essentially post that the second part of the contra against the supplier. So into supplier payments, make sure I've got the right contra bank account selected again, choose the relevant supplier, pop in the date, make sure that's the same date as the other side of the contra against the customer, which it is in my case. And then against that outstanding invoice, we're going to pop in the contra amount, which is £60 in this case. Save it, go back to the main bank accounts window, and you can see we're back to a zero balance. So we haven't actually received any money there. What we've done is we've just contraed the balance. It'd be pointless you doing a full payment to the supplier of £100 and then sending a payment back to you for 60. You just want to contra it off. Now, Neve, your question there, how do you do a contra entry to a nominal code? So if you're talking about a contra entry where you're wanting to balance off a customer balance against the supplier balance, then this is where sometimes you see people employing the credit note method. So going back to the example, what I would have done is I could have posted a credit note against the customer account to a specific nominal code. And then what I would do is against the supplier account, I would raise a credit note for the same amount. Again, posting it to the same nominal code. Now, the reason that I haven't covered that one today is because that method doesn't work for all VAT schemes. The method I've just demonstrated by posting a customer receipt and a supplier payment is the easier method and the better method as well. You're not messing around with nominal codes or even tax codes for that matter. And that brings me on to Julia's query as well. Julia's asking, do all the transactions need to use the same VAT code to contra? No, what you're doing is you're contraing off the values. So again, what we've looked at this method with customer receipt supplier payment, we haven't had to specify a tax code. And that's why that technique is applicable to all VAT schemes. So if you're doing it manually, use this manual method. Hope that makes sense. So it doesn't matter whether you're on standard VAT scheme or say the cash accounting scheme, that customer receipt supplier payment method of doing that contra, it would be applicable, it would work for you. But the trick is when you're doing the bit contra is make sure you don't use that main bank account that you're reconciling, just to keep those transactions away from that. Right, again, any other questions, just keep them coming. I'll try my best to, again, pick them up or maybe run an extra little bit of a demo just if I needed to, just to try and make sure you understand that. Right, let's pop back to the slides for a moment. And the next area we want to quickly cover with you is the contra entries option itself. Now, this is something you can access within the customer's screen and the supplier screen, but only if you're on the professional level of the software. So if you're on the essentials level or the standard level of Sage 50 accounts, then you won't have this option available to you. Again, it's a nice simple option, this one. And as you'll see, well, in fact, we'll have a look at what it actually posts in the background. So just be a case of us going into there, you'll see it, well, you'll see in the demo in just a second, it's got sales ledger, so your customer account next to what would be the supplier account. So just a case of you selecting the two accounts and then selecting the transactions that you want to contra against each other. If the values match, great, but if they don't, then again, it will post a contra for the lowest value of the two. So we'll just quickly run through that just so you can see what that looks like. Back to my desktop. And we're going to move on to our third customer this time. This A3 stationers, £60 outstanding. Have a look at the activity. I've got 2 invoices this time, so 2 invoices making up that £60, both outstanding. And the equivalent supplier account is this one here. Have a look at the activity on that one. Just 1 invoice, £100 outstanding. So what we want to do, we can either access this option via customers. You've got the contra entries option on your toolbar at the top, or into suppliers, and again you've got the contra entries on your toolbar at the top. Gives you access to the same screen. So first thing it prompts you for is which bank account do you want to use for the contra. So again, this is where I would recommend you change this from your, say, your main current account, again just to take those contra transactions away from your reconciliation screen. So I'll just use that account I renamed earlier. Specify the customer account. It will list any outstanding invoices. Then we'll do the same for the supplier. Again, it lists what's outstanding. Now, if we've got transactions that match, what we can do is select the customer transaction, select the supplier transaction. We would OK that, great, it's done. But if the values don't match, what we can do, it could be a 1-to-1. It could be a many-to-one, which it is in this instance. It could be a many-to-many. So you've got those options. Now it will tell you at the bottom the value of the transactions that you've got selected. If I deselect that one, you'll see the value changes. But I want to contra these 2 adding up to £60 against this one, which adds up to £100. So I've selected the transactions I want to contra. When I click OK, I get a confirmation message, just tells me the sales balance doesn't match the purchase balance, which it doesn't. We know there's a difference. Do you want to make a part contra for the lowest amount? So we just click yes, and that's essentially it done. So you'll see against the customer, we've got nothing outstanding at that point. And against the supplier, it's now got a reduced outstanding balance of £40. So we've done that contra. If we just have a quick look in transactions as well, you can see what it's actually done here at the bottom. It's posted a customer receipt against that customer for £60 and a supplier payment for £60. So it's essentially, it's done exactly what we're doing manually. Just a case of it's a little bit quicker because you're selecting it via the contra entries option. So again, just to remind you how to access that option, it was customers, and then just in this sort of area here at the top where you've got a group of icons, you should have contra entries, but only if you're on the professional level of the software. If you're not, use that manual method. Use that manual method that we mentioned. So Julia, you're just mentioning there, you don't have the contra entry option. So again, just have a look at the top here, see what it says on your software. If it doesn't say Sage 50 Cloud Accounts Professional, then you won't have that option available to you, that contra entries option. It'll mean that you're on the either Essentials or the standard option of the software. If you are on the professional level, you would expect it to be listed at the top there. Right, now keep your questions coming. So remember, if you've got any questions, you can pop them into the questions panel. So you will receive the email later today as well. So a link to register for future webinars or to watch recordings. That will obviously include today's webinar as well. Just to quickly mention some of the webinars that we do have coming up. I'll come onto the right slide. Let me just find the right slide for you. This one. So we've got loads of sessions coming up. You can actually book onto sessions all the way up to the end of August currently. So we've got tax codes, which I'm running on Monday, audit reports we're going to be looking at on Tuesday, business dashboard, I think that one's next week as well. credit charges, which is a brand new topic that we've got that one coming up, and also departments and budgets. And next Thursday, Jackie's going to be taking you through disputes, so how you go about setting up and customizing the dispute reasons, and also flagging your transactions. So guide you through that process as well. So if you are interested, just watch out for your follow-up email, and it will include the link that you need. Right, let's quickly go back to our slides. Not our slides, go back to the desktop, I should say. And I want to quickly pick up on Julia's query there. Julia mentions she is on the professional level, but she still doesn't have that contra entries option. So let me share my screen. Just to confirm, so we've looked at the top here, should say contra entries. Now, a couple of things it could be beyond that. Well, only a couple of things as well. One is your access levels within the software. So one is that if you log in as manager, which I've logged in as manager, it means that manager has access to everything in the software. It's like the top level user, as it were, in Sage Accounts. So you would have access to everything. If you don't log in as manager, it could be that your user is restricted. So for whatever reason, whoever has the manager logon hasn't or has disabled the contra entry option for your logon. So just as an example, let's see if I've got another user set up. I don't, so let's just quickly create one. I'll say it's a standard user. I'll put myself in just as the username. Quickly pop a password in. Just continue. And what I'll have done is, let's say I want to give the user access to everything except for contras. So if I find it on the list and I switch that option off, just click continue. Continue again, save it. That's it done. So what it would mean is, now if I go to log off and I log in as that user, not manager this time. So I pop in my logon name, log in. And if I now go into customers, I will not have that contra entries option at the top. Now, the only other reason to not have it there, if I log back in as manager, so I'm back in as manager this time. So I've displays the option again. So the only other reason for it not being there is I've hidden it. So at some point I've right clicked on the toolbar at the top and it will give me a list of the options that I have access to. So at some point I've looked at contras and thought, I don't use that, so I'll hide it. It's a good little tip that as well. If there's certain options that you just think, well, I have no use for that one. So for just the credit charges, for instance, you might not use that one. So right click on your toolbar, find it on your list. So credit charges, switch it off. Just declutters your toolbar at the top. So that would be the only other reason you've switched off the option from your toolbar. To get it back, you would just anywhere on your toolbar at the top, just right click, find it on your list. So it's about halfway down that customer list, contra entries, switch it back on, and there it is. I've got it back on my list. So it'll be one of those two reasons there, Julia. So either you log on, and if you actually log on with the manager logon, that's not going to be the case. So the only other reason, if you are on the professional level, it's because you've hidden that option. Any other questions for me at all? Actually, Julia, can I just ask, are you, I'll come back to you separately. I'll drop you an email. I think there's possibly one other option as well why you might not have it. Can you let me know your VAT scheme? Can you just pop that in for me, if you don't mind? But I'll email you separately after the webinar. Right, any other questions from anyone else? If you do think of anything, do get in touch. So I am available. You can just reply to any of the webinar emails or get in touch with our support team, or also check the help center as well. Loads of great information in there. So what I've covered today, you find step-by-step guides on that as well. Right. Okay, so I think we're just about ready to wrap the webinar up at that point. So let me quickly thank you for taking the time to come along this afternoon. Appreciate it. Hope you've enjoyed it and found it useful, giving you a little bit more insight into, again, additional processes that you might not have been confident on, or you may not have even heard of. And again, just expanding your knowledge a little bit of certain options in the software. It's not a massively used option, the contra entries option, but if you need to, you can see how easy it is to process now. So hopefully you're feeling a lot more confident if the need arises. There'll be a little survey pop up as you leave the session today. If you can take a minute to complete that, always great to read your comments and have we hit the mark with the webinar, etc. So if you've got any thoughts that you'd like to share with us, take a minute to pop them on there. Be greatly appreciated. Your follow-up email with your links to register for other webinars, watch recordings, and also a link to today's session will be with you in round about an hour's time. So on that note, we'll end the webinar at that point, and hopefully I'll see you again on some other webinars very soon. Many thanks.